Welcome to the video. So this video is going to be a little bit different from normal in that normally I go through a specific topic and do a video about that topic. This week I'm going to do just a bit more of a vlog style video where I literally just go through with you guys what stuff I've been doing in perfumery for the last week. So if you're interested, stay tuned and you can hear about everything I did. Now, before we begin, I want to do a quick little shout out to Audible, which is an online platform for audiobooks. I used Audible for about a year. What I used it for was when I was on a walk or driving or in some kind of situation where I couldn't necessarily read a book, or sometimes even when I was just on the train. I often use it to listen to books in which I could learn something while also doing other things. I was looking on Audible the other day and I actually found out that you could get Perfume: The Alchemy of Scent, which is my most recommended beginner's perfumery book, and you can actually get that as an audiobook on Audible as well. And at the moment, you can also get a free 1-month trial of Audible where you get a free book to download. So if you want to get this book for free and listen to it as an audiobook, I would recommend actually going and trying that. I will put a link in the description of this video where you can actually go and sign up and get that audiobook for free. And by doing that, if you use my link, you also help support me and the channel at the same time. Again, I have used it myself in the past and I do highly recommend it. Anyway, apart from that, let's get into the actual video itself. So what have I been doing in perfumery this week? Now, one thing that I was originally going to go and do my video this week on was oak moss and veramos. So oak moss is a certain natural raw material, and veramos is the major constituent inside of that as a pure aroma chemical. However, the reason I didn't go and do the video on that this week was because these are actually base notes, and I was studying these on the scent strip, but they haven't actually quite finished yet. The scent strips still smell of the raw material, and in order to do the video on that, I wanted to actually have the full kind of smell profile over time so I can give you guys a good description of how they smell, not only immediately straight away, but especially in the base note region, because when you're using base notes like that, it's really important to understand how they're performing in that long period of time. So this is kind of like a week or so after you've left it on the scent strip. So I might go and do that video next week, but that was one of the first things I was doing, just going and studying those raw materials on the scent strips. The next main thing that I was doing this week was actually going and studying some of the aquatic and ozonic raw materials that I have. So that's what all of these scent strips are over here. And basically the ones I looked at were canthoxyl, calone, helional, melanal, precyclamen B, and floralizone. I'll probably go and do a video at a later date actually about these kind of classes or categories of raw materials a bit more in depth, where we go and maybe look at the molecular structures, any particular usage, history that I can find on those raw materials. But for now, all I was doing was simply just learning them, you know, in a sense to kind of smell them at the dilutions, so 10% and 1%. Which are kind of the main dilutions that I use. And then I was going and making those notes into formulae on those dilutions in order to just kind of start to get an idea as to what they smell like, such that later on when I go to make perfumes which might have aquatic notes or ozonic notes in them, I've kind of already got that olfactory memory, and I've already spent time kind of distinguishing the notes in those smells, so I've got a better understanding of them and how I might use them. So one thing about some of these smells, especially things like calone and floralizone, is that some of them are very, very diffusive, is what I noticed. So when I have this, all of these scent strips out on my desk, I can walk into the room and immediately, even after a few days, I'll still smell all these fresh, watery smells jump out at me. So already from that, I can kind of, I guess, get the impression that if you're using some of these watery notes like calone in a perfume, these are going to add diffusion to your perfume, but also they're going to add that watery side that jumps out at you. And I think a lot of people don't like that as much as there are people who do like it. So I guess it's something to contend with, something to think about when using those raw materials. Also, some of them can be quite strong. So even the 1% dilutions of things like floralizone and calone, you don't need to dose them, I think, too high in your perfume when going to use them. Anyway, the kind of conclusions that I drew from looking at these aroma chemicals were that if you want something with a watery melony kind of smell, you should look at calone, especially if you want something quite strong, or if you want something a little bit more subtle, then look to helional. Also, melanal has these melony facets to it, but it also has this kind of musty side as well. So I think that this one, melanal, would be maybe a little bit harder to use. Then on the other hand, if you're looking for something ozonic, so you want really that smell of fresh air, less watery, but more kind of literally that fresh air smell. In that case, I would go for something like floralizone, which is extremely ozonic. It's basically that kind of smell in a nutshell. Or if you want something that's ozonic but also a bit watery and a bit more berry, then I think canthoxyl is a really good choice. The other one I looked at here is precyclamone B, which in the past I put and kind of categorized as in this kind of aquatic family. But when I came back to this time and actually was smelling it, I felt that I could smell it was a lot more aldehydic than I'd realized in the past. And I actually decided to kind of recategorize that in my categories as aldehydic. And to me, it's reminded me of other aldehydes that I have, and also kind of a laundry, like a fresh laundry detergent smell. So not necessarily, it's not as though it wasn't fresh and aquatic. It still had that kind of fresh, like watery side to it, but it wasn't really juicy, aquatic, watery in the same way that some of the other things like the helional and the calone were, which have a lot more of a juicy kind of melon aspect to it. Anyway, my method for studying these is basically as follows. So firstly, take the dilution, the 10% dilution, and ideally the 1% dilution as well if you have that. Take one of your scent strips, and then firstly put the name of the raw material, the percent which you're evaluating it at, and then also the date and the time. And then what you want to do is go and dip the scent strip in, and then I like to use these little kind of scent strip holders, which I have in order to just keep these scent strips. But if you don't have one of those, you can just actually like fold the tip up like that, and then you can leave that down on your desk. All you want to do is make sure that the tip isn't touching the desk because it will contaminate it with the raw materials. Once you've done that, you just want to come back to it every now and again and start making notes on how it smells. And the most important period probably is right at the start usually, because that's when it evolves a lot. So you could go and smell it straight away, and then you could come back after something like 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, whatever's convenient for you, I would say is the most important thing, especially if you're going to be doing this a lot, because in the past I tried to keep to a more strict schedule of when I evaluated things, but now I'm kind of a bit more of the train of thought that it's better just to smell things as much as you can when it's convenient for you to make the notes on it. But by doing that, the whole process becomes a lot more nicer. And then therefore in the future, you're just going to do more of these evaluations on the same thing. And eventually you're going to kind of fill in the gaps of where you're missing information at like which time points you're smelling it from. So what I was doing was I would take it, smell it firstly straight away, and then write down in my dilution entry on formula what I thought it smelled like. So the key facets or the key elements, the key descriptors that I would give to that smell. And then every time I came back to it on a new line, I would make a new entry of the descriptors for that time period. And it's interesting doing this because you find some raw materials, they actually stay very constant in their smell, but some also seem to evolve a lot over time. And I think that's really important for getting to learn the raw materials, because this information is very important later on for when you're making your perfumes, because sometimes you may have a note in the mid region of your perfume, say, and it may be caused by a material that actually evolved a bit from straight away to after a few hours. So it may be something you wouldn't have noticed just by going to smell that raw material immediately out of the bottle. But if you'd left it on a scent strip in kind of for a day beforehand, then you finally start to notice, okay. Anyway, basically you keep on making more lines for new evaluations at a further point in time until finally the smell on the scent strip has become essentially imperceptible, either extremely faint or you just can't smell it anymore. And at that point you can kind of say, okay, I can't smell it. And then also by doing that, that's how you work out if your raw materials are top, mid, or base notes. Because if it only lasts an hour or so, then it's a top note. If it lasts around a day or so, you can say it's a mid note. And if it lasts something like a week or longer, then you can definitely say it's a base note. Anyway, in order to do all of these evaluations, I actually firstly had to go and make some of those dilutions because, for example, Calone, I only ever had a 10% dilution before. I hadn't got around to making the 1% yet. So quite a bit of the time this week was just spent remaking some of those dilutions. So for example, this is the one I made for the Calone. And when I was actually going to do this, interestingly, so I had to go back to my box of pure raw materials to get the Calone out, and what I ended up finding was this other aroma chemical called Ambermax 50, which I didn't even know I had. So I saw that in there and I thought, that's strange, I don't recognize that. And I went and checked, and it turned out I'd somehow bought this like 2 years ago and completely forgotten I had it. So at the same time, I went and made a dilution of that as well. And if you're interested to know what the Ambermax 50 smells like, well, that's a woody amber. So it's something a little bit like Cedar Amber, Isoe Super, and it also reminded me maybe a little bit of Nolimbinol, that kind of region of aroma chemical. What I noticed about it was it seemed quite strong, quite diffusive, and I definitely think there's a lot of potential to use this. I haven't really had a chance yet to try it in any blends, but if you're interested, well, that's what I thought about it. So back to the Calone. So when I went and made these new dilutions, because nowadays I'm often making dilutions in this style of bottle with the printed label, and the reason for that is literally just for my perfume business. I do spend a lot of time making these labels so I can print them so they look very professional. And as part of that, one thing that I mentioned a while back in a video on storing and organizing raw materials is that I also like to put a label on the top of the bottles. This time, for the first time, I actually went and did a printed label for the top of my bottles for my kind of professional looking bottles instead of the ones like in my old video, which were just where I'd taken a pen and written it on the top of the bottle. What I would say is that you definitely don't need to go and print all your labels for your bottles. Literally the only reason I'm doing this, again, is just this kind of presentability aspect for the business. If you're just doing everything at home for yourself, there's really no reason to waste your time because it takes ages to, firstly, you have to go and design all these things on the computer and then you have to go and print them, and it takes a while just to get it all sorted out. What I would recommend is literally whatever bottles you have, putting labels on the side with the raw material names, and I would recommend just finding some small circle labels for the top. So you can write the first letter of the raw material. For example, for Calone, I would put C. And that just means that if you have a massive shelf or a box full of bottles, in order to quickly find the one you're looking for, you can just quickly identify by the letter of what the name begins with which one it might be. It just saves you a lot of time when searching for your raw materials. Anyway, so that's basically what I did with the aquatic and ozonic notes that I was studying. So the final thing I did this week was I actually went and made a couple of binary combinations. If you're not already familiar, a binary combination is what I like to call when you just have two different raw materials and you put them together, you blend them together in order to try to make a kind of certain simpler chord, let's just call it. Because some combinations don't work well together and some combinations work really well together. So I think it's quite useful to go and test out these binary combinations quite often, because when you find something that's good, that's really useful because you know if you have a perfume with both of those two things together, that could have a really good effect on it. Whereas conversely, if you work out a certain combination, say, doesn't go well together, then you also know in general that maybe it's best to avoid having those things together. So before I go into the two that I did, I'll quickly share a little tip that I actually came up with for my own perfumery app, Formula, which is a kind of way to track to-dos. So there isn't actually a to-do feature built into the app, but what there is a search bar feature which can search for any text in the names of your formula. And what I started doing, because I'm starting to build up a set of certain things which I need to make, but I don't necessarily always have the time to make them straight away. So what I started to do is actually just add literally the text to do at the end of the name. And this was really, really useful because now all I need to do is search the words to do in the search bar at the top, and I instantly get a list of all the formulas that say I've written down, but I haven't had a chance to make yet. So when I'm finally at a time where I'm looking to go and just make a load of things up, then I can just search that to do, and then I can work out which ones I can go and make right at the time. The reason I'm sharing that is just because I know some of you guys who watch my video also use my app Formula, so that's just a little tip for you guys if you want to do something similar. Anyway, the two binary combinations that I had on my to-do list were C space 345B and nerol acetate. So this is a combination that I came up with in September. And basically what happened is I think I was studying these two raw materials just on the scent strips, and I noticed when I put them together that it smelled really nice. So cassis base, if you're not already aware, is this kind of tropical fruit smelling base. And then nerol acetate is it's kind of when you take nerol and make the acetate version, the smell on its own is a bit hard to describe, but I would say maybe it's somewhere in the kind of herbal, floral, woody region. It reminds me maybe a little bit of orange blossom twigs or like petit grain. It's got its own smell to it. Anyway, what I basically noticed was I thought they smelled good together. So what I did was I just went and made a blend where I did 0.21 grams of each of these at 10% together in a sample bottle, and I went and smelled that on the scent strip, and I thought that, yep, it was really, really nice. So the cassis base is probably a bit stronger than the nerol acetate, so that did definitely take the kind of dominant kind of part of the smell. But what I feel is that when you add this nerol acetate, it just kind of adds this extra dimension. It's a bit like maybe in a context where you wanted to use that cassis base. I just really like this combination with the nerol acetate. It just kind of adds something to it. It adds this second layer of complexity, and I just think the two combine really, really well. They naturally kind of fit together. So if you're interested, or if you say have those two things, then I would also recommend you just go and try them. Even if you don't actually make the mixture, just hold the scent strips next to each other and you can see what I mean. So that's one combination that I tried. The other one is ethyl linolyl acetate and vanillin. So I was actually watching a sensuality video, so he's another perfumer YouTuber, and I noticed that he said that he liked the combination between linolyl acetate and vanillin. So I actually don't have any more 10% dilution for linolyl acetate because I used it all up and I haven't had a chance to remake it yet. But what I do have is a 10% dilution of ethyl linolyl acetate. And adding the ethyl group really doesn't change the smell very much, so it's essentially the same thing. It is a bit different, but it still smells a lot like linolyl acetate. So what I did was I did 0.1 grams of each of those two together and blended them. And yeah, this one was also quite interesting. So I actually do think the combination of these two was quite good. It worked quite well. I would say the vanillin definitely is quite strong at 10%. But I do think as a general accord, having a perfume where you have vanillin, I think having some linolyl acetate in there is something that could work. It, to me, smells a bit like some kind of sweets, maybe. You know those kind of paper, I think when I was a kid, there was a certain type of sweet that was like this kind of paper that you could eat. I don't know why, but it reminded me of that a little bit. But anyway, a lot of things with vanillin in, because it is that canonical vanilla smell, which is used in a lot of flavorings. A lot of things with vanillin can easily smell like sweets. But either way, I do think the combination of the accord was fairly good. Anyway, if you are going to try this combination, the one thing I would note is that linolyl acetate or ethyl linolyl acetate, they're both mid notes, whereas vanillin is a base note. So what that means is the accord will only last into the top to mid region of your perfume. So that's about, let's say, a few hours on the skin or about a day or so on the scent strips. So what that means is after that, you'll just be left with the smell of vanillin. So I would make sure that if you're going to use this, you use this in a context where you've got base notes that work with just vanillin alone as well, because once the linolyl acetate's gone, that's all you're going to be left with. So you want to be using this firstly probably in terms of, say you're making a base note accord for your perfume for the base, which has vanillin and some other things in it, and then you want to maybe try adding the linolyl acetate on top afterwards, because then at least you know that when the linolyl acetate's gone and therefore that accord has also vanished, but you're left with the vanillin, that your vanillin is still working in harmony with the rest of your base notes for the rest of your perfume. Anyway, so those were the two binary combinations I tried. I definitely did like both of them. And that is about everything that I've done for this week. So yeah, as I say, this video was a bit different. It was literally just a complete monologue, a complete brain dump of the perfumery things I did this week. So I hope you find that interesting. I'm actually kind of interested to know if you guys like this this kind of vlog style thing, or you prefer the kind of more structured videos with the research topics, so definitely let me know in the comments what you thought about that. And aside for that, I'll get back to you soon, hopefully next week, maybe with the oak moss video, maybe something else, I'm not sure yet. Yeah, we'll see. So until then, see you next time and have a great week.